Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning if you're in North America or Canada. Very, very warm welcome to our event today, Unlocking London for Fintech. My name's Janet Coyle. I am the Managing Director for Business at London & Partners. For those of you who are unfamiliar with London & Partners, we are London's international trade, investment and promotion agency. So before I outline the event, I just want to mention just a couple of quick housekeeping points just to help you get the most out of the event today. And first of all, when we do go into the panel, probably best if you click on gallery view, which is in the top right hand side of the Zoom webinar, and then you'll be able to see all the panelists. You will all be on mute today because it is a webinar, so if you do want to ask any questions, do feel free to use the chat function. I'm sure you're all used to this by now, but let's make it as interactive as possible. So put any comments or questions in the chat, especially when you hear our fantastic panelists. So the aim of today's event is really to share with you some insights and tips, opportunities if you're a fintech company looking to access London's customer base, our talent, our ecosystem, and it's part of a whole series of events that we are hosting over the next few weeks, including a trade mission, but more of that a little bit later. Now, London has always had a very strong relationship with North America and Canada, and the growth of our fintech sector over the last 10 years is really sort of testament to that, and it's really able to sort of leverage that very close relationship that we have. So let me first just talk a little bit about London and why we are very proud of our fintech sector, that it's experienced considerable growth over the last 10 years. Just a couple of quick facts. Did you know, for example, that London's home to 250 foreign banks? It's the highest concentration of any financial centre, employing 150,000 people. It's also home to over 1,000 global fintech headquarters. That's the largest anywhere in the world. So for those of you who are on the call who are considering expanding into London, you'll shortly hear from our expert panel, just all about the ecosystem, some tips about why you should choose the UK for your base in Europe. At London & Partners, our team here are really ready to offer you a warm welcome, together with our network of partners. And the services that we provide are really bespoke in order to help you really navigate all the opportunities. So if you're wanting introductions, if you're wanting introductions to regulatory bodies, if you're wanting to get some help on finding the right talent, if you want to know which part of London that you should be really looking at, if you're wanting to stay remotely at the moment and just still access all the opportunities, we can do that too. So do think about us as your sort of friend over here who can really help you with any questions that you might have. We also support companies, including fintech companies, who are wanting to use London as a base to expand into other international markets. It's we have a very strong community here of fintech companies. And I'm pleased to say many of those have really thrived and really grown even during the last few months during our global pandemic. So for example, companies that you may have heard of like OnFido raised $100 million in April this year, and they've used that to really support their expansion into North America. And then other companies like Monzo, Revolut, Starling, they've all been really, really growing and going from strength to strength in recent months. But I'd now like to share with you a video. You're going to hear lots more about London from our Lord Mayor of London, William Russell. Now, the Lord Mayor has global UK trade, innovation and culture as his theme for his year in office. So each Lord Mayor has 1 year in office, and they're all voted in by the aldermen of the City of London. So as part of his ambition, he's aiming to grow trade, champion innovation, and promote a rich and vibrant cultural and creative economy. He has over 30 years experience in the financial and business city, including very senior positions in national and the international banking sector. So let's hear from the Lord Mayor himself. Thank you.
Good morning if you are watching in North America, and good afternoon if you are watching in the UK. I am William Russell, the 692nd Lord Mayor of the City of London. Thank you all for joining this London and Partners discussion on unlocking London's fintech scene, accessing clients, customers, and capital. Seeing the blossoming of London's fintech scene has been one of the highlights of my time at the City of London. Centuries ago, London laid the foundations for modern banking. Decades ago, it devised the first modern international capital markets. Now it has become a crucible of fintech, from digital-only challenger banks to peer-to-peer lending to regtech and blockchain. I have witnessed this firsthand throughout my time at the City of London, whether it be chairing stakeholder groups dedicated to fintech or supporting the UK's membership association for fintech, Innovate Finance. Innovation is now a key strand in my mayoral theme, Global UK, the new future. I see fintech as an evolution of the financial services industry, where startups can showcase new services and collaborate with the established financial and professional services which we have been home for many years. Fintech is digitizing financial services and allowing far greater numbers of people in every country to participate. And by doing this, by bringing services closer to the customer and making them easier for people, fintech can ultimately help rebuild trust in financial services and in business. The cluster of fintech businesses, which has turned London into a global hub for fintech, are a vital part of the City of London family. London is now home to over 1,000 global fintech headquarters, the highest number in the world, more even than New York or San Francisco. London's fintech sector has received more than 5 times the amount of investment than any other European city. And London also has the most fintech jobs in Europe. Now, this did not happen accidentally or automatically. Fintech was able to spring up due to the existing financial ecosystem here in London, as one of the world's leading financial centres and home to more foreign banks than any other city. Due to a regulatory environment which encourages innovation, including the FCA's regulatory sandbox, which helps new innovative products to launch. And above all, due to the pool of global talent here. It's worth emphasizing that more than 40% of those who work in fintech in London are from overseas, including many of the brightest minds from North America, Europe, and Asia. More than 70% of digitally active customers in the UK use fintech services, a higher percentage than in the US, Canada, Germany, or France. London's fintech scene has really proved itself during the COVID period, providing new forms of payment and new services as more and more people have gone online for their finances. Now, tech firms are leading the way in creating new jobs at a time when other sectors are struggling. And despite all the challenges of COVID, London's overall attractiveness as a top investment destination has remained undiminished. The first major poll of global investors since the start of the COVID crisis shows that 99% are still keen to invest in the city, a sign of confidence in London's fundamental strengths, global connectivity, a diverse talent pool, and a culture of innovation. But also a sign of the importance of global investment to London's economy. I look forward to speaking to many venture capital and institutional investors on my own virtual trade mission to North America next month, when I will showcase the strengths of UK innovation and look to build new partnerships. I hope today's session will enable you to explore opportunities to expand into the UK market and access clients, customers, and capital for your business. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. Wonderful to have that welcome from the Lord Mayor himself. And I know that his team stand ready to help any of you who are wanting to access their network and opportunities in the city. I loved his comment about a crucible of fintech in London, and that's exactly what we have here. So now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our fantastic panel for today, hosted by Anton Ruddenklau, who's Head of Digital and Innovation Financial Services at KPMG, a real expert on this sector. So thrilled to have Anton as our moderator. He will be joined by Charlotte Crosswell, CEO of Innovate Finance. And I know the Lord Mayor referenced Innovate Finance, a phenomenal organisation. We're very lucky to have them. Priya Guha, venture partner at Merian Ventures, who has spent time in San Francisco. I'll let Anton do all the proper intros at San Francisco and London. Cormac Sullivan, Senior Fintech Specialist for Fintech Hub at the Bank of England. And Brian McKenney, Chief Innovation Officer and Head of Strategic Initiatives at HSBC. So welcome to all of our guest panelists, and I will hand over to Anton. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet. It's good to be here, and welcome everyone from the amazing world of London. As you can see, we've got a good, we've just invented a good band over here as well. They might do well in the future, so we'll see. So what I'd like to do is have each of the panelists just do a little bit of a personal introduction. We've got an awesome panel here that represents different parts of the industry. So what we might start off with is Charlotte, just do a brief introduction of yourself and a little bit around Innovate Finance and who they are, please.
Great, thanks, Anton, and I admire your background, so I need to raise my game on that one. So yeah, Charlotte Crosswell, Innovate Finance is the UK fintech industry body, so representing the UK's interest in fintech, and we have banks, asset managers, insurers, fintechs of all sizes around the membership ecosystem. But we also deal a lot with overseas fintech hubs as well, as they look to their plans of regulatory coordination with the UK, but also a lot of fintechs who are looking to come and grow over here as well. So, really, I like to think of us as the British Airways flight map, what used to be the British Airways flight map, maybe. We normally can get you there in two. We may be able to get you there directly, but certainly, dealing with West Coast to East Coast to Asia to the Middle East, and everybody who has interest in this most amazing sector is a pretty exciting place to be. As where background, I've been hanging around tech world for a very long time, over 20 years, and the finance world as well. So I guess it was always inevitable I was going to end up in fintech. But great to be here today, Anton.
Thanks, Charlotte. And if we just take a stop off then in the plane that is Charlotte Crosswell across to Priya. And Priya, do you want to give a little bit of an introduction?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Anton, and the London Partners team for inviting me to join you today. So my name is Priya Guha. I'm a venture partner at a VC fund called Merian Ventures. We're a San Francisco headquartered fund, but invest in the US and UK in female-led technology. I have a few other hats. I'm a member of the board of the UK government's innovation agency, Innovate UK, and also an NED at the Digital Catapult. And I advise a number of UK startups and scale-ups. In a previous life, as Janet referenced, I did spend 5 years out in San Francisco as the UK Consul General, so heading up the UK government's operations there. So delighted to see some names dialing in from the West Coast today. Thanks, Anton.
Thanks, Priya. And then also from the West Coast, although he's based in London, I don't know how that works. We've got Brian McKenney from our largest financial institution here in the UK. Brian?
Hi, Brian McKenney, Chief Innovation Officer at HSBC, focused on building new customer propositions, leveraging the latest technology innovations, so things like distributed ledger technology, working very closely with a number of fintechs, both commercial arrangements and equity investments. And previously led the bank's first internal fintech venture, built the leading social payments app in Hong Kong called PayMe from HSBC, and very happy to be here today.
Thanks, Brian. And then finally, from one end of the world to the other, back into the Bank of England, our central bank, we've got Cormac here, who represents the innovation arm of our central bank. So Cormac, over to you.
Hi, Anton. Thanks a lot. As you mentioned, I'm from the Bank of England. I work in our FinTech hub, where we think pretty hard about how we can support the FinTech sector as part of our mandate to enable competition and innovation. In particular, my work focuses on the international. So I spend a lot of time looking around the world at sort of best practice, making sure that the UK, across our suite of regulators here, are at the cutting edge and doing the most we can to sort of support the industry, support innovation, and look to really reap the benefits from that in terms of financial stability and ultimately the service provided to the UK public.
Thank you, Cormac. So, right, so you can see a good panel, good cross-section industry. I'd like to start with Charlotte, because there is a big question, I suppose, on everyone's mind, which is we've got the UK, we have London as a real star of the UK for FinTech. Can you give us a real sort of quick tour of what makes London special and why institutions should be interested in coming here and being part of it?
So normally I would say that, I would talk about physical geography. So how close we all are to each other and how that's helped build up the ecosystem. That's slightly washed away now. But I do love the fact I could do a speech in San Francisco, Australia, and the Middle East all in 1 week. But certainly that that proximity in said geography, the banks, the regulators, the government ministers, the fintech scene, everyone is within 20 minutes of our office normally. And what that's meant is we've built up that ecosystem in such a strong way, developed thinking about it. So when the regulators were looking at how they could support fintech and innovation in financial services, which really is what it is, everyone's been around the same table. Now the great thing is that we can then build on that while we've all been remote. But it would have been quite difficult, I think, to be having calls like this if we hadn't been able to build up that ecosystem. A lot of people talk about tech and the fact that it's so well connected in the US, and I'd like to think in fintech, no one thinks about fintech without thinking of London, and I think that has been because there has been a strategy of of that coordination. For most people based in the US, they would think it quite strange that you would have a regulator sitting on around the same table as maybe a big tech and fintech and a bank, not about regulatory issues, but just sharing advice and sharing thoughts. So often when we get fintechs coming in from overseas, we might phone up the regulator and say, "Oh, can you have a chat to this?" Which is quite a strange concept for most overseas markets. And I think that exchange of thinking and ideas has really helped us develop the fintech scene. When investors are looking at fintech, they're always going to look at the innovation and the incubation of companies that are coming out of universities here, the talent that's here from all over the world. It's a lot of Americans working in fintech in London. So really strong ecosystem that's helped us build. But now it's going forward. I talk about this being the end of phase 1 of fintech. I think if anything, COVID has accelerated that we're now sitting there taking all those great ideas we've had and saying, okay, how do we pivot now? How do we use that to respond to this crisis? What's fintech's role in the economic recovery? And really think about that broader opportunity across that. So it ultimately comes down to ecosystem, but the development of that over the last few years has really made us become pretty strong on the global scene.
One further question, Charlotte, before we move to another panelist, just to give an illustration of how that works within the context of London. So put COVID to one side or keep it, whichever you prefer. How does it work and what are the benefits of this ecosystem in this city?
Like the tech days back in the 90s, it's a real buzz. So if you come to London and you can do this now, you have to see how many fintech webinars we're seeing from London every week, is you can plug straight into that scene. It doesn't matter where you're from, whether you're a fintech, whether you're a bank who's trying to understand the fintech scene, whether you're an investor and I want to come and meet 25 fintechs in a day, that all is happening every single week. And I think that's really, really important that people know, you can call us up, you can call the L&P team up, put yourself up, Anton, and go, how do I get plugged into that scene? And here you are, you're going to have a range of invitations to whatever you want to learn about, whether it's an investment, whether it's AI, whether it's DLT, RegTech, obviously hugely strong at the moment, or how the challenger banks has started. Just incredible to have that knowledge and that group together.
Thanks, Charlotte. And if I just move on, Cormac, to yourself and the Bank of England, obviously you keep us financially stable, but also you have a fintech hub and a series of capabilities to help us move into, I think you call it the future of finance, with even a paper announced. Can you give us a sense as to what that looks like, what your commitment is to innovating legacy financial services, and also some of the other regulators that you partner with in the market? How does that manifest itself over here?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Anton. And just to echo some of Charlotte's points there, I think it really does speak volumes that we as the regulator feel comfortable sort of coming on to an event like this to really sort of make the case for fintech and for innovation, because I think at the core is really sort of a belief that fintech can sort of improve the quality of financial services, and that can pass through sort of into the actual sort of the ultimate experience people have and the stability of the system. So the Bank of England, we've done a lot of work thinking about the future of finance, thinking about how we can improve the systems and the infrastructure that underlie so much of financial activity. So as part of that, we've got a series of commitments. We'd like to think about them around the commitments to our sort of hard infrastructure, so the systems that we run. We run the RTGS system, that's the backbone of payments in the UK. Essentially every payment made goes across this system. We're in the process of upgrading that system, and as part of that, we're really looking to what we can learn from new business models, new technologies, consulting very widely with the industry, with fintechs in particular, to think about what payments of the future are going to look like, and therefore what we need to do to support that. We also think a lot about our soft infrastructure, which is the rules and regulations, and how we actually disseminate those rules. So, for example, we have a sort of a rule book, as most regulators do, that is very long, very dull, not a good read. But we, jointly with the FCA, are looking at how we can sort of bring that into the 21st century and have quite an ambitious project around making that rule book machine readable, so that firms can actually build code to sort of automate large volumes of their compliance. So that's a multi-year vision. It's a big investment, but it speaks to the kind of activities that we as the Bank of England and the FCA are looking at. A lot of people have heard about the FCA sandbox, which gives great support to young companies, provides a way for them to test their ideas, to really demonstrate their value. But there's so much more going on. Across every activity of financial services, you get a real sense that regulators are working hard to both understand and to work constructively to find ways to make things work where they're clearly sort of where there's a case to be made that there'll be a benefit to the quality of financial services that people receive.
Thanks. And just add one other thing, Cormac. Can you just talk around the GFIN network? Because my understanding is, we have such a good reputation from the regulatory environment that we're the lead on, a market consortium of countries that are trying to adapt and evolve according to the rule book here, right?
Yeah, that's right. So, the FCA has really led the way on sandboxes, like I say, and that has sort of percolated out. There's lots of sort of people trying to replicate the success and the good things that have flown through that. As part of that sort of leadership role that the FCA have carved out for themselves there, they've established this global financial innovation network to really bring ways for people to come together so they can not just test applications in one country, but they can they can test those applications in a cross-border context, or they can check that if it works in one place, that it will work in another, which really speaks to sort of the benefits of working with the UK regulators, which I think it is fair to say we are seen as the gold standard, and that percolates through into the way these sort of networks organize themselves. And that's true around sandboxes, but it is true around a lot of other areas as well. So, for example, at the Bank of England, we're chairing the committee of the BIS's Committee on Payments and Market Infrastructures that looks at a whole range of sort of standards and regulations in that field. And it speaks to sort of the confidence the international community have in the UK regulators to think very deeply about these things and to share lessons from them in an open and collaborative manner.
Thanks, Cormac. And if I just, one of my learnings at least from KPMG is, London acts as a gateway to the rest of the world outside of the US. So, we've helped many clients come into Europe, or indeed many clients come into Middle East, Asia, or Africa. It leads me on to Brian then from HSBC, 53 markets. You truly are a global institution. I think, Brian, your role is to not just to develop here for the London and the UK market, but also globally. So it'd be nice to hear a sense from you as to what a large legacy firm like HSBC is doing right now, how it sees the corridors that you follow.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, London's critical for us as our global hub, and we look. It's also the UK is a very important market for us, but of course Asia and Middle East and the Americas as well. As I was sort of speaking to earlier, we're constantly looking to evolve and build new customer propositions, improve the ones that we have. And increasingly, in fact, the first protocol when we have new concepts that we're testing, that we look to see, are there fintechs in the market that have this capability out of the box that we can use as a real accelerator. So we really view the whole scene in fintech as a real benefit for us and the industry, delivering better customer outcomes and enabling more pace and agility and customer-centric propositional design and business models. So, how we do that is we're sort of always have our pulse on the market. Having a presence, like a sales presence in London for us is very valuable in terms of developing those relationships. And having been involved in many fintech pitches and in many commercial arrangements and subsequently some equity investments as well, I would probably say the one thing that we really do is it's increasingly the quality of the tech stack that the fintech is bringing to the table that's most important. It's a lot of the pitches will read the same, but it's when we actually do a technical architectural assessment, which we will do as part of any commercial arrangement. It's seeing just how modular and scalable and strong the underlying tech is, how easy it is. It's great when it can be ported to multiple clouds, for instance, and also are the use cases that the fintech envisioned for the platform. Has the platform been designed in such a way that additional adjacent use cases can be easily enabled? Because often we find that the actual customer use case that we find interested in the technology isn't what the original founders had in mind, but the best ones, their technology easily scales to those additional use cases. And in fact, the previous venture I referenced, PayMe from HSBC in Hong Kong, we built with two fintechs as a core part of both building and running the platform. And one of them, it was not the originally designed intention of the payments platform underneath it, but because of that flexibility in the architecture, we were able to do a commercial deal and subsequently an equity deal with that company. So it's a really critical space for us and our future success, a real accelerator of what we're trying to achieve. And we think the partnerships with the fintech community are of mutually beneficial, really tri-party value both the fintech, the bank, and the customer that receives the benefit at the end.
And it would be fair to say, Brian, that the large banks, HSBC included, there's been a real test learn iterate on fintech collaboration, but you're getting to a point of maturity now, right, on how to make it easier for fintech to collaborate with you.
We have put in new policies and procedures. I think what Cormac was talking through from a regulatory perspective, super beneficial for a bank like HSBC, and then also helped us like shine a mirror internally on our own procedures and policies. So we've implemented a number of different paths in for fintechs that don't go through all the sort of typical procurement hurdles that are needed. And also just to say, we've done deals commercially with Series A companies many times. So it's really not about how big you are and established you are. It's more about how good your technology is, how flexible it is, and then how we can form a commercially mutually beneficial partnership.
Thanks, Brian. And you mentioned the magic phrase Series A, and I saw Priya get excited because obviously she's an investor, and we're on to the fun stuff now, which is how do I get the money? So Priya, it would be really interesting to hear your views. You've been both in the US, both over here in the UK. From an investor perspective, what's looking interesting for you right now, and what type of themes across the market do you see as being interesting to support?
I mean, I think just stepping back 1 second, Anton, what is really striking for me is actually that the pace of investment in fintech in the UK has not seen, the feared slowdown that has been sort of hanging over as a shadow over the whole of the tech sector globally, really, because of the pandemic. You know this, but just for the benefit of the audience, what we've seen during sort of 2020 so far is 2.2 billion pounds raised by London-based fintechs during what's been a really tough time for so many sectors, so many industries. And if you look at that as a comparison with other places, that's compared to about sort of 1.5 billion in New York, 0.37 billion in Berlin, 0.32 billion in Paris. So, there is a lot of money coming into this space. And I think, to answer the second part of that question, the reason that's interesting is because actually there is the wide breadth of opportunity in the UK. So it is really a place where every aspect of fintech innovation is happening, which means that every part of fintech is able to access the source of capital that they're going to need to accelerate their journey. And I was talking about that with the context of VC, but I think, to what Brian was just saying now about the partnerships that they've been doing with HSBC, is also around other forms of collaboration, investment and partnership, not least CVC. The reality is, with so many of the top global financial institutions being based here, if you want to be in the room, and I say that with the sort of suitable inverted commas in the world of virtual working, but if you want to be close to the conversations that the C-suite of those businesses are happening, there's no better place to do that than right here in London. So I think it's also really valid from a CVC perspective as well.
Thank you, Priya. So what I'd like to do is starting to get a few questions coming through, and Andy Acton's talked around open banking or open finance. Going to start off with Brian just in respond to that, because he was asking what the opportunity might be, and we had a question come through before as well about how the regulators consider open banking and how they're supporting it. My personal opinion is that the banks have been light on opening up their banking. But Brian, you're in some respects working the other way around, thinking around how you not just open up the bank, but bring corporates close to you. So some observations around open banking environment and what the opportunity might be would be helpful from you before we go back to Cormac.
Yeah, I mean, open banking does open up a wide array of opportunities. I think it's still early. It's definitely still early. And the end customer value has got to be like the foremost of how we think about approaching it. So we've taken an approach of course, complying with the regulation. So our accounts and payment rails are now open per the standards that exist. And that's been a big effort to do so. You know, that was not a small investment to do that. And it's, I think, really beneficial to have that open marketplace. And then it's how you bolt on propositions on top of it. And another space where we've looked at fintech partnerships to do so. We know there are both sort of standalone fintech propositions and ones that are joined up with banks out in the market. I think it's still early to see, you know, what will ultimately sort of win in the space. But I do think it started a trend. London led on this, and now as a global bank, we're seeing it in Singapore and in Hong Kong. It's looked like it's going to come to North America, Australia. You know, this trend is accelerating. You know, just like UK led on faster payments, the concept is going to be building and growing and expanding. So we see it as a really important one to be proactive with, as opposed to defensive, because that's the right outcome for customers and for the businesses and economies that we serve.
And Brian, before we just move on to Cormac, can you just give the alternative perspective as well? So we look at the large big tech firms, the big multi-sided platforms, Amazon or whatever, have already been moving into working capital loans and payments and all the stuff that you know well. What's the view of an HSBC on how they invert their model? So how they start with maybe platform first, working back into legacy? Because one of our questions here was, well, Tesco seems to be going open banking route. So obviously you would have identified that already. And where do you see fintech coming from the US able to collaborate in that space?
Yeah, that's a very big question. I think the big technology companies are all sort of taking slightly different approaches. A lot of them, a core question is, do they want to be a regulated financial service provider or not? Are they structuring deals such that the bank is actually, that they partner with, is actually providing the underlying service to the end customer and using the bank's license, or is the technology company getting a license? In either case, there's an opportunity for fintech, either working directly with big tech, and I know there are some firms that have purchased source code and worked with fintechs to sort of accelerate their own capability, or to work with the bank to create a more, you know, the buzzword banking as a service type capability to help the bank plug their legacy into those new platform that are offering new financial services. So there's kind of a number of different models. I think it's unclear which one's going to win, but it will be certainly a very good and interesting space to watch, and rife with opportunities for those that have the right relationships and the right technology.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you. Cormac, your view as a regulator, do you want to see much more opening up? I think there has even been a commitment from the central bank to maybe allow fintech to ultimately access your treasury. I don't know. You give us an update.
Yeah, and so first, let me just kick off by saying I agree with a lot of what Brian said. You know, it is early days on open banking. I think, you know, what we've seen has been, you know, really interesting developments. You know, current account APIs up and running, payment initiation sort of, you know, beginning to get going. And you know, as Andy Acton has pointed out, I'll be interested to see how it develops in the next 3 years, but this is clearly an area where the UK regulators have sort of led the field. It's an idea that's spreading globally, and I think that is because it is, you know, seen as being so important that we develop these kind of levels of interoperability to sort of promote competition, to, you know, promote innovation, and we're seeing that in a big way. In terms of where we're going with this, I mean, I think there's one question around open banking and how that evolves, but I think there's a wider question about sort of platforms in finance and open finance generally, and that's where we're doing a lot of our thinking. So we've put out a sort of a paper, and we're championing this idea of a portable credit file, which is really around sort of building up the stock of data, particularly for SME finance, as sort of an initial use case. So looking at ways we can build off the experience of open banking, which is, I think, overall our assessment has been that's been very positive. I think in particular the UK is led because this came through a CMA mandated competition order, so it really had quite a lot of force behind it. But I think, and Brian's comments speak to this, that the banks are sort of realizing that, this has the potential to be a win-win, that, there is benefits to partnering with fintechs in the UK, and that there are ways in which, having bottlenecks of data actually is not in sort of the wider interest, or even in banks' private interest at times. And if you can find ways to leverage that innovation, you can really drive forward the overall ecosystem. And, I think from our perspective, the question is, how can we take this forward? How can we try and, bring these ideas out in other aspects of finance where it's particularly needed? So the bank, we're looking closely on SME finance, but the FCA also have a wider consultation on open finance that also seeks to look into a lot of these questions. And my hope is that just as we've been sort of world leading on open finance, on open banking, we'll also be world leading on open finance. And as a result, it's another good reason to be connected to the London ecosystem.
Thank you, Cormac. But just look at another fast-growing area. This is to you, Charlotte. Obviously, big rise in discussions now around ESG, climate risk and change. I've got a couple of questions that have come through. One is around where the sort of greener, more environmentally positive outcomes that fintech can support. I'd be interested in your views on that before we then go on to discussions maybe around purpose and inclusion and diversity as well.
Yeah. Certainly, if we look at what's happened in the fintech scene, it's quite interesting to be able to look at that and say, how can we then export that into green finance and ESG? And some people would see them as very separate. My view would be it talks about the future and the role of technology into financial services. And we're already seeing that, so fintechs that we've been working with for some years have actually been looking at the green agenda, saying, actually, we're working on a wealth tech app, and we want to target this at the millennials. We know that green and ESG is incredibly important to them. So we're going to start giving them that data of how their investments are being deployed into those areas. Or you can actually opt to top up, like your sort of Vault account, and you can top some of that up into ESG investments as well. So that's just the start of it. I think, the beauty of having, done so much around the fintech scene is the sector stands ready to say, look, let's use that ecosystem to say, what do we want to deliver in green? Are we greening finance? Are we financing green, which is the whole debate at the moment? And let's instead get the best of our brains of entrepreneurs and founders around the whole ecosystem. I said, this is what we're trying to build. We want to have more transparency, as I said, more responsible investing. And then let's go to those people who've already, innovated around the financial services space and use them to take us the next step forward. So, we deal with, the teams at Green Finance Institute, which for those who don't know, has been set up in London as part of a local government initiative. And there's the Impact Investing Institute, very focused on ESG. And this is happening up and down the country as well. So I think it comes back to my, my initial comments on building out that ecosystem. We have an ecosystem who knows how to innovate. Just tell us what you want to innovate and we'll make it happen. And you're starting to see, coming back to the open banking conversation, we're starting to see that coming in to open banking, where banks are looking at that, and saying, right, add your accounts in here. What more data do you want? Okay, you want to know how much your data in your savings is coming through the coming into green and ESG, and let's give you that data as well. So I think you're going to see an incredible acceleration of transparency. You're looking at the millennials, the Gen Z, Gen Alpha, who just think about this as totally normal. Of course, you're going to sit there and want your investments, to be responsible, and the drive coming in from the banks and the global asset managers behind this. So great opportunity for us to continue to lead the way. And certainly, whenever we have overseas delegations, what do they want to talk about? They want to talk about fintech and they want to talk about green with London. So I'm hoping we copy and paste some of our success there and really replicate that drive to take our financial services forward.
Thanks, Charlotte. And if we move over to the Gen Z world of Priya then, obviously representing that cohort for us on the panel. So you started off investing in female-led entrepreneurial businesses, but you got a real passion for broadening out and offering opportunities for people to start their own businesses. Can you talk around the opportunity here on diversity, inclusion, and helping founders of any type of background be successful?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it was Hazel who asked the question in the chat around the talent pool in the UK, and I think it's really important just to sort of start to say that there are a ton of people working in this space in London. I think it's about 44,000 people work in fintech in London, so it's a huge talent pool. And what you have in London, just because of it being such an international city, such a sort of attraction for talent, is that it's a very diverse talent pool in the broader sense. Diverse in terms of obvious things you might think about, including gender or disability, but actually also diverse in terms of ethnicity, and diverse in terms of geography. If you're wanting to set up a fintech that operates in languages from all over the world, well, the reality is you can find those languages spoken here in London, which is a huge advantage. I think maybe this other specific point that's really worth mentioning is that inclusion is a very, very central part of how the UK ecosystem is thinking about its evolution, particularly post-COVID. And Charlotte mentioned in her introduction that sort of financial inclusion has become a really important part, rightly, of the COVID recovery story. And I think we've seen some really important roles that fintechs have taken in that recovery, including things like the government-backed loan schemes being opened up to fintechs to participate, which was done really swiftly and shows how that is being embraced as part of the overall economic solution. Specifically around gender, I think the other point that's really worth bringing out, and this is something that probably some people in the audience will already have tracked, but the reality is actually that a diversity piece is also important for the UK economy, for the fintech economy here, because we know from multiple studies that actually that brings better return for business. I'm sure people have seen the McKinsey study that's been done a number of times. The most recent version, I think, came out just earlier this year. If you look at our diverse business by gender, there's about 25% better performance for that business. If you look at diverse company by the representation of minority communities in that business, its performance is about 36% better than the average. So this is inclusion because it's the right thing to do, but also inclusion because we know that that means the economic growth of the businesses will be immensely superior. And that's really, really important for the story of fintech here in the UK.
Thanks, Priya. Thank you. I've got a couple more questions here that have come through. One from Declan McDonald, and maybe I'll ask you on this one, Charlotte, and I can always support with some feedback as well. They're based in Canada, this fintech firm, looking to come over, set up an office, maybe 10 staff, 50% developers, 50% customer support. So he wanted to understand, how long does it take to start up a business over here or an office? I suppose he wants to understand a little bit around, is real estate available right now? And also, what are the practical sort of first couple of steps he should make to come over?
I mean, I think there's probably plenty of real estate at the moment, and you can even do it from the comfort of your own lounge now. And in terms of actually practicalities, and obviously every business is different. Plugging into the system, is easy piece, as I mentioned, and anybody here, and please reach out on LinkedIn to help you on that. Getting an office, getting a company set up is quite easy. You will have to think about the bank account. Where you go, but maybe we can get commitment from Brian to get that done in a efficient way. And the identity, and I know that does take time, and we've heard that before. But certainly, I think there's a genuine willingness, and there's people who help you on the ground. I mean, any of these people here will be willing to help you through that process. I think that's the great thing about it. Is we've actually got organisations like LP, like government, who literally are here to say, we want you to come here. We want you to come and set up offices here. And we're happy to direct you to the right people, so we can take that offline.
Yeah, definitely. And I just add that from an advisory perspective, if you're coming over, just give us a call, drop an email, and the network across here, it doesn't matter which accounting or advisory firm it is or which VC, we'll take the call and we'll respond pretty quickly. That's always good to help out. Second question, Ian Kerr from episode 6, Brian, seems to be a familiar name. He says, I totally agree that fintechs can bring value to banks, maybe more so in adjacent use cases to where they started. How do you think traditional banking procurement processes can accommodate this opportunity? That's a fun one.
Yeah. So they need to. I think the primary hurdle that often gets hit is the traditional bank procurement process will want to see the financial stability of the provider, which in this space is not often not the case, because they're early stage companies that maybe aren't yet profitable and are spending more than they're bringing in revenue very sensibly. So there's some adjustments there in mindset and policy. I think there are ways commercially to create more of a fallback safety. In particular, something that we've done is like a force majeure from a legal situation, source code access. So having that be there as a sort of safety net for the bank in a situation where it's necessary, so that the service doesn't stop being provided in case the fintech is no longer financially viable. So that's like some commercial constructs that can be used to help clear some of the obstacles that are created from the early stage financial nature of the companies and how that historically it can be challenged from a bank's traditional procurement process.
Thank you, Brian. And I suppose, again, if Ian wants to ask more detailed questions, you can always get you on Instagram or whatever, right, or Twitter. A couple more questions that have come through. One is around the differences in customer bases between UK and US. And we had one of our questions beforehand was on the pensions market, because obviously there's 401ks and all sorts of good stuff over there in the US, and firms like Betterment have existed because of that. Well, we don't have that here. So I don't know who wants to pick this up, whether it's yourself, Priya, given you've lived over there, or Charlotte with your experience. But later life, pensions, products, that market, what should a fintech who's in that space consider when they're coming over?
All I'd say just briefly on COVID is it's been estimated 6 million people have downloaded an online banking app during the crisis. That's 12% of the working adult population here. But actually, what majority of those have been the elderly population. It's the over 50s, as they've been obviously looking to manage their money online, just not being able to get to a bank. And a lot of this comes down to savings, and where your pension gets invested and how they can take, how they can get that information digitally now. So who would have thought that this would have been the crisis that accelerated that? But it seems to be really ramping up. We're already going to see biggest wealth transfer in history, happening over the next few years. So again, the pensions market is really hot, and it's where a lot of people are realizing that as that transfers to the younger generation, to the millennials, who are going to want to understand how to manage that digitally. They're not going to be going into physically into a wealth advisor anymore. And we're seeing real ramping up of partnerships, looking to fintechs to help them, and fintechs realizing that opportunity is about to really explode. I mean, I don't know if you feel the same, Anton, but certainly it's been a huge growth area. And I've heard asset managers saying that they reckon it's accelerated the transformation this year by 3 to 5 years. It's a race to bring those that transformation in.
Yeah, look, I totally agree with you. And just an observation for anyone who's over on the other side of the creek and wants to come and do things with older people. There's a real gap. I think there's a real gap in the market for proper services to people over the age of 60. And we're all getting older, living longer, and yet we're all focused on the younger cohorts, which is great, right, for lifetime value. But there are people there that I think are lacking specific services. They are underserved. Yeah. And back to the open banking question, if we were to combine health, wellness, finance, savings, lifestyle all together in a package for people over 60, that would be a godsend. So I call it the crusty old version of Monzo Bank, but if you can bring one over, please do. We'll have that. Cormac, just from the central bank's perspective, you must have a view on, again, later life, longevity, the amount of digitization that Charlotte's just talked around accelerating. What's the view on, again, white space for fintech and the difference in the UK here?
Yeah, so I think that's right. I think, you know, from my own experience, I mean, I've lived in North America for about 5 of the last 10 years for a variety of different roles. I do think, you know, at all stages in life, that there is a greater openness to digital financial services. I mean, partly led by the ecosystem, things are available and people are much more used to and comfortable using them. But on top of that, I think there is sort of creates its own momentum and people are actively seeking these things out. And on your point, I think that it does seem to me that sort of catering services to the older generation is an important area where there is room for sort of better developed products and sort of more sort of well-targeted services. I think, you know, that's part of the vision with a lot of this sort of open finance and open banking to some extent, is that it means that more nimble sort of companies can come in and really target specific areas where there is there has been challenges sort of getting the services people need to those areas. And I think Priya mentioned earlier that, you know, inclusion has really sort of shot up the agenda as a result of COVID. I think that is particularly true of inclusion of the old and the maybe not the old, but the older in this case as well. So I think that is something that you're only going to see more and more momentum on that over the coming years. And certainly from the regulator's perspective, is something we think about a lot, and we'll have to see how the plans we have pan out. But it's certainly an area of active interest.
Thank you, Cormac. Now we're just on time, so I suppose final observation from you, Priya. If we go from the old back to the new, what would be your final coaching point for firms that want to make the transition, come into the market? Top 3 tips, please.
Well, I'll start with one, which is that I think, you know, use all the resources that we've talked about in this sort of a conversation to really land and hit the ground running. And now, as we've said a number of times, that can be a virtual landing in this day and age. It doesn't have to be a physical, but actually, you know, there is an ecosystem who's ready to help and connect you to the people you need to be connected to. So ask for that help and start quickly. I think the other thing is, where you can and you're looking to hire, try and find a local hire who's come from the UK fintech scene, because I think that's a really helpful way just to have an instant network of connections and relationships. And I think the last thing I would say, and you know, Brian might get a lot of LinkedIn requests as a result of this, so apologies, Brian, in advance, but I think connect into the big players, connect into the larger corporates, connect into the larger banks and financial institutions here. There are plenty, as we've said a number of times, but they are really looking to innovate, as we've seen with all the things that Brian has been talking about. So will be a fantastic way to have an instant market when you land here.
Thanks, Priya. Really, really good summary. I'd just like to thank the panel. I think that was awesome. Hopefully, everyone who's been listening have found that useful. You've got 5 organisations who care about this. So as Priya says, do reach out, but particularly to Brian. And we'll hand back to Janet. Thank you.
Wow, thank you all so much for being so open and for obviously sharing all these brilliant stats and tips, and a warm welcome from all of you. For anyone on the call who's looking to expand over here. Gosh, I learned some new things today as well, particularly about the downloads of mobile apps for over 60s. Yeah, thank you so much to Anton and Charlotte and Brian and Priya and Cormac. We are sort of getting close to time now, but I just wanted to mention a couple of other quick things before we close. So as I said earlier, this is part of a series of events. Next week on the 8th of October, there's another sort of webinar, also on Zoom, with US investors to really help fintechs understand how to access investment. And then on the 21st of October, you'll be able to hear from some of the fintech scale-ups in London and also those in North America. We're bringing them together so they can all talk about their own sort of expansion journeys and share some tips with you all. So do join us on the 21st. We'll send you details about these as a follow-up to today, so you'll easily be able to click on the links and register. Also just want to quickly mention our WhatsApp broadcast that some of you may already be aware of or may already have signed up to. We created what we call our Global Good News Room, where we have over 1,000 people now registered on this around the world. If you just literally send a message from your phone to this number, say that you would love to be part of our London Good Newsroom community, or just ping them and say, I'd like to be connected to your WhatsApp, you will then receive good news stories probably every few days about the London ecosystem or about specific stories, some of them from fintech. And you can easily tweet them or put them on your social channels. But if you have a good news story and you would like us to share it, then email it to us and we can get it out on our Global Good Newsroom this way. So that just leaves me to thank all our guest speakers again today. Absolutely fabulous to have you all with us and sharing your own experience and insights. Please complete this poll for us, just to make sure that we can keep building on the content and the quality of these events that we're bringing you today and in the next few weeks and months. And also thanks for being so engaged. It was great to have so many questions for our panelists today. The more engaged, it means that obviously the more interested you all are. We are all here to help you as you look to expand. And you heard from obviously Priya and Charlotte and Brian and the others really about that warm welcome here. And I genuinely would say we have probably got one of the best ecosystems in the world in terms of that collaboration and helping to plug you into that ecosystem really quickly, really efficiently. We all want you to do well here. You know, we want you to come here, obviously, but we want you to do well and thrive and scale and maybe use this as your base to expand into other sort of international markets. So we look forward to helping you in the future or in the next few days if you're wanting to, maybe Declan wants to work quickly and set up his fintech in London in the next few days. Happy to do that. Also happy to support you in the longer term. So thanks again, everybody. Thanks to the team for hosting. Thanks to our panelists and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.